How are we going to find a way to live sustainably on this planet? I'm going to make the case that we have to become animist. We have to start recognizing the spirit inherent in this world, as our ancestors did since time immemorial. So there are a few reasons why we use 100% local ingredients at Vinland. And we are actually the only restaurant in the world to use 100% local ingredients in every dish. I don't think it's the only way to be sustainable, by the way. And I wouldn't say that we are completely sustainable. I think that we are pushing in that direction. Every day, I'm putting checks in the hands of local organic farmers, small fishermen, cheesemakers, artisans. They're spending money very often similarly. These are people who have shared values, who are also buying local food, who are also investing in the local economy. It creates a magnifier effect. Now, form is something that you don't really hear a lot about when it comes to cuisine, but I'll tell you, I have a great mentor in my life. Well, actually, I've been lucky enough to have many great mentors in my life, but perhaps the greatest of all was Robert Bly, is Robert Bly. He's a poet. I met him when I was in grad school for poetry. In fact, the day I met him, he handed out this little self-published journal of the thousands. He did several editions of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. You can tell when these came out. And he writes, "A nutty assumption which pervades much American thought about poetry is that form will hobble our free spirits. But once you've watched several thousand hours of television, you might wonder, what free spirit?" In any event, nature looks at form differently. Form is something playful that actually increases one's chance of survival in a dangerous world. Form is not a thing invented by human beings. On the contrary, nature seems always to be thinking about form. The clamshell makes its shape with a series of elegant repetitions. Each object you find on the beach or in the woods is a masterpiece of achieved form. I owe a great deal to Robert for my cooking. Perhaps more to him than to any chef I've worked for. But the place where I probably learned the most about cooking and where I was certainly most intensely challenged was the restaurant Noma in Copenhagen. I don't want to overstate the extent of my experience there. It was 2 months in the summer of 2011. I was there as a stagiare, an apprentice. It was an extraordinary opportunity and experience. This is a restaurant that's regarded by many people as the world's best. And what sets it apart? Why would it be better than the hundreds of other restaurants where they're achieving their cuisine more or less perfectly with absolutely consummate skill, which they certainly are. But again, they're not alone. And to me, what sets them apart is their sense of form. They've created a whole movement called New Nordic, which perhaps, strangely is now being done far beyond the Nordic region. And the Nordic region has not traditionally been thought of as one really rich for food. But they have such a stringent sense of form and so much ambition that what they've achieved is remarkable. It's a masterpiece of achieved form. I thought about doing my whole talk on form. As you can see, it's something I love. But actually, this talk is about spirit. That's the final reason why we use 100% local ingredients. Spirit. In Latin, the word is anima. What does it mean to see spirit in another? It might mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but in very concrete, practical terms, I think it means to see intrinsic value in another. If I look at another, human or non-human, and I see them only as having value or a lack of value unto me, then I'm engaging with that other as a thing, as an object. That's the essence of objectification. Now, morally, you can do whatever you want with a thing. And this is a problem I'm going to posit. When we regard things as things, we can exploit them, we can use them. The only thing you might worry about is, am I running out of things? It's quite contrary to the notion put forth by Thomas Berry. He wrote, "The universe is a communion of subjects rather than a collection of objects." That's the essence of a worldview that functionally is antithetical to that of the dominant culture, where we objectify practically everything. But this is the essence of animism. I'm going to use the term indigenous to mean societies that are animist, Extractive agriculture was born with the agricultural revolution, and that is the hallmark of civilized society. And I don't mean civilized in a value-laden sense. So a very important hallmark of civilized society where we have this objectification, this sense that we live in a world of things, that we have dominion over these things. Oh, where's that dominion come from, right? It comes from God. And God is this notion that spirit is somewhere else, right? It's like Milan Kundeра's life is elsewhere. It's like spirit is elsewhere, right? As opposed to the notion that spirit is right here, immanent in this world, in every aspect of this world. Once you begin the objectifying process, saying, oh, well, that only has value unto me. That's an object. It's a thing. It doesn't have spirit. It's like, well, where do we go for spirit? Well, maybe we go to the woods. Maybe we go to the great trees and we worship there like early pagans. And then an interesting thing happens. As you go further down this road, the spirits become further and further away. And they stop being trees. And maybe they become part human, part animal. And then they become all human by the time the Greeks come along. And then they're on top of a mountain. And then they're off in the heavens. And then you've just got this one God. And he's still got his angels, right? But they're not gods, even though they're immortal and super powerful and all that. But they don't have independent agency. So you wind up having this hierarchy of spirit that's impossibly far away and becomes, interestingly, more and more and more reflective of the tyrannies back home. And by the time you get to the industrial era, people start saying, there's no more God. Atheism. But the point here is that atheism is not the opposite of theism. It's the logical endpoint of the process that brings us theism. Animism is the opposite of both. It's the immanence of spirit. I grew up loving maps. I was that kid, and totally still am. So you look at this map here, and it probably looks pretty familiar. But give it a good close look. You might notice there's some weird things about it. For example, the Gulf of Mexico is pretty small. This was our world 18,000 years ago. At peak glaciation, the end of the last ice age. Sea levels were 300 feet lower then than now because there was so much water trapped in the great continental glaciers in North America, in Eurasia, and to some degree over the world's mountains. That broke down over 10,000 years. I think that's a pretty critical thing to think about. You'll notice there's no Persian Gulf here, no Caspian Sea. The cradle of civilization, the place where extractive agriculture was born, the place where this objectifying process and this despiriting of the world began, was in a place where we may have seen the most destructive floods in the world. And mind you, the Great Flood myths exist worldwide during this period when sea levels rose 300 feet. That is just about when Lake Agassiz, the continental sea, glacial sea over North America, breached and rose global sea levels by 30 feet in a matter of probably under a year. That's also when the Persian Gulf was inundated. That's something to think about. I love farms. I'm not anti-agriculture as most people understand it. I actually founded my business. I founded Vinland Restaurant so that I could be buying from small organic farmers, so that I could be showcasing their beautiful products. These farms are really not emblematic, for the most part, of what I'm talking about when I say agriculture. These farmers are fertilizing with compost, grazing their animals on pasture. They're moving more and more towards building perennial polycultures. This is one example of what a permaculture might look like. Permaculture is a new word, relatively speaking, dating to Australia in 1973, but it's a concept that goes back to time immemorial because indigenous people have practiced permaculture since probably before we were human, but also for the hundreds of thousands of years that we were human before the agricultural revolution. So what is this agriculture that I'm talking about? It's based on the notion, and this is totally impossible in animism, it's totally impossible if you believe there is spirit in other beings, and the basic way to interact with this world, to be in this world, is to enter into relationship with a myriad other beings. But the basis of extractive agriculture, only possible when you begin with objectification, is to say this land belongs to me, exclusively to me, or exclusively to me and my tribe. It doesn't belong to the beings who exist there. I don't belong to the land. I can do with it whatever I want. I can cut down all the trees. I can wipe out all the vegetation. I can destroy all of the mycelial networks, which Paul Stamets argued in a TED Talk is the neural network of ecosystems. I can destroy all the animals. I can drive them out, destroy their habitat, kill them, create an area, a large area of bare topsoil, which is an ecological catastrophe. It's not meant to exist. And then plant row upon row upon row of identical monocrops of annual plants, typically grains. Sucks a lot of nutrients out of the soil, leads to progressive erosion. The Fertile Crescent was called the Fertile Crescent for a reason, but you all know what it looks like now. And that was organic agriculture. That wasn't industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture just speeds up the process. The agricultural revolution was a radical break from everything that existed before. It was really a break from our spiritual union with this world. 1% of species are going extinct every year right now. Those are the best estimates. 1% every single year. It's hundreds every day. 1/3 of all the wild life on this planet has been wiped out since I was born. I was born in 1978. There is now more plastic than plankton in the world's oceans, possibly by a factor of 10. 90% of the predatory fish are wiped out, and the remaining 10% are being yanked out faster than ever. 10% of the world's primary forests remain, and they're being cut down faster than ever. Guys, if this is not a human-caused apocalypse, what is? We can't turn a blind eye to it. I know, it's a bummer. And there are so many distractions. It's so easy to look away. Believe me, our culture makes it very, very easy to look away. But if we're willing to cast our eye in the direction of these critical realities, we can still have hope. The thing is, we have to be the hope. We're all connected beings. We all have rights. We all have spirit. President Evo Morales of Bolivia recently became the first head of state in the world to enact laws defending the rights of the natural world. He's also the first indigenous head of state in the Americas since the European conquest 500 years ago. There's reason for hope, but we have to be the hope. Buckminster Fuller, in his fantastically prophetic book, that he says, when I'm working on a problem, I never think about beauty. I only think how to solve the problem. But when I've finished, if the solution isn't beautiful, I know it's wrong. It reminds me of the John Keats quote, "Truth is beauty, beauty truth. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know." I think that tells us a lot about the spirit and the wisdom inherent in this world. There's nothing more fundamental to our relationship with the earth than the food we eat. You know, like our dogs, our allegiance lies with the source of our food. I mean, I love my dog. I'm sure she loves me for other reasons too. But the material conditions of our culture will reflect our core values. And the values will arise more than anything else from the way we feed ourselves. It's critically important that we buy from small farmers, that we tend a small garden, that we learn to forage, that we go fishing, and maybe we go hunting. Maine's a good place to do all these things, by the way. It's going to shift your allegiance, believe me. No matter how much you may want to be aligned with the earth, no matter how little you want to be aligned with the corporations, the more you're actually feeding yourself from the earth and from your immediate community, the more your allegiance will genuinely, in practice, be with them. Different ontologies hold different truths. Different lifeways produce different results in the character of a society. Our nature as humans is not predetermined. It's a spectrum of possibility. So what elements of that spectrum become manifest in a culture are going to have a lot to do with the core value system of that culture. Not so crazy as suggests that that core value system might shift us one way or the other. I mean, we're all capable, human beings are clearly capable of incredible goodness and also incredible evil. Most of us are in a narrower spectrum. we have the capacity to shift our place on that spectrum, and collectively, we have the capacity to shift our culture on that spectrum. So when people ask me some version of the question, like, aren't you romanticizing indigenous cultures? Kind of like Rousseau's Noble Savage. My response is, I don't think so. I think I'm really talking about material sustainability. And if we equate that with utopia, that says more about us than anything else. Because really, that should be the baseline of a culture. Is it materially sustainable? It doesn't mean that everyone was always nice to each other, right? It just means, is it drawing down the basic land base upon which it exists to the point of collapse? What do we do? We have to re-indigenize. It's going to be a very, very long, slow process, but we have to become indigenous people on our land. So what do? Grow something, anything you can eat. Forage, hunt, fish, feed yourself, shift your allegiance. Buy from people doing right by the land. Cast your whole vote, like Henry David Thoreau told us. Boycott corporations, support ethical businesses, starve the bastards. This is war. We didn't ask for this war. Tecumseh didn't ask for this war. Crazy Horse didn't ask for it. It was brought upon them. There's an enemy. Name them. Do not support them. Ecocide didn't just happen. It's not just happening, and nor will a resistance just happen. Frame your conscientious choices as liberation and celebration rather than renunciation. Nobody wishes on their deathbed that they'd spent more time driving, shopping at box stores, scanning Facebook. Nobody wishes they'd been less loving, less generous, less courageous. Listen to the land. If we can learn to listen, we might just fall in love with this world. And then, and I do believe only then, will we find the path to genuine sustainability and a culture worth calling our own. Thank you so much.